So just to introduce myself, my name is Anna Holland, and I'll be hosting the talk tonight. You may recognize me as one of the two young people who threw tomato soup at Van Gogh's Sunflowers last October. And I did that because every day since I was 15, I've been unable to decide whether to be more scared for my future or more angry that we are letting the government get away with constant abuse. Well, tonight, I am angry. The UK government is in the pockets and the beds of the fossil fuel industry. Before the Prime Minister approved over 100 new oil and gas licenses, thereby laughing in the face of the United Nations, the International Panel for Climate Change, the International Energy Agency, and each of the millions of people who have lost their homes and their lives to the climate crisis. His family firm received £1.5 billion from the oil giant BP. The Conservatives have sold our futures to the highest bidder. And as long as they are being paid off by the fossil fuel industry, they will do nothing to protect us. So we need to protect ourselves. We need to come together and fight for each other. Because when the climate breakdown inevitably causes the breakdown of society, no one is going to save us. Every day now, every time we turn on the news, we see nightmares. Parents running from wildfires in their sandals, clutching their scared kids to their chests. Food systems breaking down, leading to rises in crime and starvation. Single mothers risking their freedom because they can't afford the baby formula to feed their children or Calpol to soothe their illnesses. Homes, businesses, lives swept away in floodwater. All the while, the people who were supposed to protect us are getting richer. The Prime Minister would have you believe that the answer to all of these horrors is more oil and gas. Except, from the approval of a new license for exploration, it will take on average 28 years for any oil to be produced and profited from. Even if oil and gas were the answer, does the Prime Minister expect us to wait to survive in these unlivable conditions for a further 28 years? In contrast, the largest solar panel farm in the UK was built in 6 weeks. We could begin the transition, cut our energy bills, lead the way in the global fight for climate justice all before Christmas. So why do we resist? Because our government and the man who runs it are evil and malicious and abusive. And the only thing that they care about is making as much money as possible in order to fund their greedy, excessive, and dangerous lifestyles, and I will not stand for it. We will not stand for it. We have to resist for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, and every single person in the global south whose lives are threatened further every single day that we do not fight to end this climate crisis. And that's why tonight we're here at this talk. And on this agenda, we have a special conversation with Chris Packham. And I'm so thrilled to be asking him some questions about climate justice and what we as everyday people can do in the fight. During this conversation, if you have a question that you would like to ask Chris, then please submit it through the Q&A function or in the chat, which sends directly to a co-host. We'll have time for a few questions from the audience. Then we'll be hearing about strategy and plans for the future from a few of the amazing Just Stop Oil supporters who work tirelessly to organise and mobilise and resist. The talks will then be followed by optional breakout rooms. And these breakout rooms are a space for if you want to join a Just Stop Oil facilitator in a smaller room to discuss how you felt from the talk and how you feel you can take the next step in the fight. This will last for about 15 minutes. But just before the breakout rooms, as I said earlier, there will be a poll launched that we would love you to take just 2 seconds to do. This poll is to see which of the pathways to action you would be willing to take. And so these pathways to action are the outcomes we want from this talk. There are 4 of them. The first is committing to a slow march with your region, with your local region for a week and risking arrest at least once. Second, people all over across the country are attending non-violence training to learn skills and resilience to join us in civil resistance and feel part of our community of trust. Thirdly, people are donating, usually 1 hour's wage every month. So say if you earn £10 an hour, you could donate £10 a month. Links are going to be posted into the chat now about donating that will ensure we can support everyone who wants to join the campaign and play their vital part. Finally, if you're students and interested in taking part, then joining the Student Action Network, also registering and coming along to the big student event that we have tomorrow and this weekend. That's the 1st and 2nd of September in London. Links for all of these pathways are going to be shared in the chat. And again, I do urge you to fill in the poll at the end of this talk so we can get a better idea of how you want to join the fight. So let's get started. We're going to begin by welcoming Chris Packham. Now, Chris Packham has led an extraordinary life. He's gained recognition as a naturalist, a television presenter, writer, photographer, conservationist, campaigner, and filmmaker. He's always been active and vocal about wildlife and conservation issues, injustice, and in recent years, the escalating climate crisis. He has stuck his head above the parapet to publicly support Just Stop Oil, championing the voice of young people taking direct action in the climate emergency. And for that, I consider him one of my heroes. Now, just remember, if you have any questions for Chris, then please do submit them to the tech and the co-host, and we'll choose a few to ask. So, Chris, I wanted to begin by asking you, why do you support Just Stop Oil?
Anna, nice to see you, first of all, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak this evening. I hope you're well. Why do I support Just Stop Oil? Well, for a multitude of reasons, and I'll try and keep them as concise as possible. Firstly, Just Stop Oil have a very simple objective. They are attempting to achieve what they say on the can, just stop oil, through a rapid transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels into the renewable sector. And they see that investment in that sector is a fantastic opportunity, both for social and economic reasons. And of course, the overarching environmental need to get rid of fossil fuels. I think the reason why I support them personally is that I share with so many of the other supporters of Just Stop Oil a very deeply entrenched fear for our future. I never thought that I'd get to a point in my lifetime where I felt as imperiled as I do now. So, of course, I have worries about the future of all life on Earth. I love life, everything that slithers, slimes, stings and crawls. But I have a stepdaughter who is 28 years old, and I significantly worry about the world that she will inherit when I'm gone. I'm also impacted by guilt. I have been part of a generation that has known about some of the aspects of the crisis that we find ourselves in since the 1980s, and we failed to do enough about it. And that's why we find ourselves in an even more dangerous predicament now. So I do feel that our generations of activists, campaigners, whatever, have not acted with sufficient, well, what shall I say, furore, gusto in order to implement those changes. We haven't been shouting loud above their noise, and as a consequence of that, I feel that it's time to step up on that account. I think that Just Stop Oil are one of a few activists that are now actually out there doing anything and trying the very best they can to keep this issue in the public domain, gather media attention, not necessarily for the stunts or the actions that take place, but for the message that needs to be conveyed off of the back of that. And that message is sufficiently simple. I think it's really important that we have a radical flank when it comes to climate activism. I think there needs to be groups of people who are seen to be more radical than others. This, in a way, breaks the ground for views which are then seen as more moderate behind them and easier for people to support. So without young activists like yourself, Anna, and all of your colleagues and participants, then people like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, who have similar aims and ambitions, of course, would be seen as the extremists. So having to carry the burden of being seen as an extremist and be abused by quite wide sections of the press, particularly the right-wing press, requires a degree of bravery. So I suppose the last of the reasons that I might, encapsulate here to explain why I support Just Stop Oil is admiration, because some of us are doing what we can within our lives to address these issues, but without people who find the courage to take to the streets and feel the wrath of public sometimes when they're being disruptive, or certainly now due to the draconian changes in the Public Order Bill and the way that the court system is being structured, the way that juries are being treated, and the way that sentences are being handed out. Every time someone from Just Stop Oil decides that they have chosen to make the ethical decision that those ethics are more important than the law, because the law is not sufficiently, is not there to protect them, then they could feel the full ferocity of the state. And the full ferocity of the state means at the moment that we're seeing climate protesters jailed for longer periods than, people who commit sexual assault. And so it's a place where it's difficult to be. And I therefore feel, again, an onus as a 62-year-old man to not feel like the hero described by Anna, because if there's any heroes here, it's certainly not myself. It's people like Anna who have chosen through one reason or another to summon the courage to take that public action, to draw people's attention, not actually just in the UK, but all over the world, to the plight that we find ourselves in. So yeah, a plethora of reasons. And I hope I've managed to summarize them all adequately there.
Thank you so much, Chris. So just on the back of that, you've mentioned a lot about the reasons and the bravery it takes to take action. And you mentioned a bit about the very, very negative backlash Just Stop Oil received from the right-wing media. So in light of that, do you think that what we're doing is working? What sort of progress have you seen in your time supporting Just Stop Oil?
Well, okay. I'm just looking at the bottom of the screen now, and I'm seeing that we've got 683 participants. And I remember speaking with you and people who wanted to join us for a conversation like this, probably was it a year ago? And we were speaking to, less than 100 people who'd chosen to join one of these webinars. So I think people are, beginning to understand that whether they agree with Just Stop Oil's methods, they fully understand their motives, and their motives are pure, they're true. We fear for our future. We don't only fear for a future, but we have, as you intimated in your introduction, many of the solutions which we could be implementing now to protect ourselves now and in the future. And what frustrates us is that we are not in a position where our elected representatives, either here or indeed all over the world, are implementing those solutions. It's not something where we're scrabbling around looking for a shot in the dark. We have had teams of scientists and people within industry who know exactly what we need to do to begin to address this issue with far more seriousness than we're seeing at the moment. So I think, there is, I think, a growing sympathy, even when people are disrupted. I think that we get a sense where people say, look, these people are interrupting my life. They're spoiling my day. They're interrupting some sporting event, this, that, and the other. But they've got a point. I don't like what they're doing, but they've got a point. And I think we're getting closer to another point when those people think, well, actually, maybe they've got more than a point. Maybe I actually have to listen far more to what they're saying. I have to think far more about why they're doing what they're doing. And I have to start thinking about how I can act positively to address this issue as well. And I imagine that history shows us that as these movements progress, we get to certain tipping points. We never know whether we're close to the edge of one of those tipping points. It makes it very hard for activists like yourself, Anna, because you don't know whether it's the next action or the action after that or the one after that that's really, really going to turn public opinion. On the other hand, we have, organs of hatred in the right-wing press that paint us all as eco-terrorists, eco-zealots, eco-something derogatory. And that makes it difficult for people to summon the courage. And I've already mentioned the oppressive nature of the legislation that's been drafted to prevent protest at this point. And again, we might fear that would keep people off of the streets because they would be intimidated by those very real threats. But the problem is when governments don't listen to protesters, I think they make life more dangerous for themselves, because the protesters will do everything they can to be heard. They will escalate their voices. Now, I'm not saying they're going to escalate them violently. I'm going to say that we're going to use our, creativity and imagination to make sure that those voices are continually heard, whatever the oppressive legislation is. So I think we are making significant progress. Work has been done in the United States. Scientists looked at 6 weeks of Just Stop Oil action and found that the radical flank effect really does work. It showed spikes in support for other more moderate agencies. So again, that shows that we are communicating with people. They may not agree with the methods, but again, as I said before, they understand the motives, they understand the fear, they do know there are solutions on the table, and they go elsewhere to try and find their own way of instigating change. But that's progress as far as we're concerned. We're still leading them to that point.
Absolutely, thank you so much. You mentioned the organs of hate in your answer there, and I just wondered, obviously, I've been a victim of some quite vindictive hate campaigns from right-wing media, as you have yourself. Why do you think the media takes such a strongly negative reaction to what Just Stop Oil are doing? If, what we're doing is for the good of everyone, even for people who hate us. Why do you think they are so against our movement?
Well, I mean, there are undeniably vested interests there. That's written on paper. We can see that. I think our biggest problem, if you want to know, is not, and it's not restricted to this type of campaign. It's something that I encounter in all of my campaigning, is that what we are essentially doing is asking people to change their mind more quickly than they want to or are able to. And the human species is remarkable for all of its creativity, intelligence, adaptability, resourcefulness. I could go on. I mean, we are remarkable organisms. But the one thing that we are handicapped by is an inability to change our minds very rapidly. And of course, if we can't change our minds, we can't change our practices. Now, you and I, and many of the people on this webinar, will know that the situation is critical. It's beyond urgent now. The scientists who we take all of our advice from, and let's face it, what motivates us in the morning to get up and find the courage to do the things that we do, and is the fact that we believe in the science and we trust that science. We listen to it and its interpretation. So therefore, we know that we're in a dire strait and we have to do something now. Well, not everyone is prepared to enter that transition at the speed that we would like them to, or indeed we probably need them to. And that's why I think that they're resistant. So I don't think it's just malicious vested interest. I think that it's that we're asking for something which many people perceive as impossible to do, transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels. We know that's not impossible, because in times when humans or the human species is put under enormous stress, and I can think of a couple of examples of that. Going back to my father's generation, it would have been, of course, the Second World War, which put pretty much the entire planet under stress. We were at war with one another, fighting one another, millions of people losing their lives. Very significant changes were made in the way that people lived their lives and the way that they conducted themselves in a very short space of time, almost overnight. And whilst I'm clearly a pacifist and no fan of war, certainly at a time when our largest crisis is sorting out the planet and not bickering over ideologies or religions or whatever else it might be. I draw your attention to one thing, and that is that before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the North American car manufacturing industry was making millions of cars a year. From the morning after, on December the 8th, they made less than 200. So overnight, faced with a threat, albeit a tangible one, in a ghastly wartime threat, they radically changed their industrial structure in America. More recently, I'll draw your attention to the COVID pandemic. Now, mistakes were made. It was a tragedy. Millions of people died. Nevertheless, when you think about how quickly we responded to that. So we could have been prepared. We knew that there could be a pandemic. Were the vaccines in place? No, they weren't, but they were very rapidly developed. Enormous amounts of endeavor went into developing those vaccines, which have saved millions of people's lives. Tragically, millions were lost. But there is no excuse for us to say that we can't make very significant changes very, very quickly and deal with them. The problem is that I think that, both clearly the ghastly Second World War and the equally ghastly COVID pandemic were far more tangible to people. That people's houses were being blown up, people were being shot and killed, and then we were watching people, either people that we knew, or we saw, very close to us, being infected by COVID, and some of them tragically dying. It was much closer to us. It was much easier for people to perceive than climate breakdown. But again, going back to your earlier question, why are we gaining more support? Well, we've just watched a summer of global tragedy. We've seen people's lives being lost. We've seen their livelihoods being lost. We've seen their businesses destroyed. We've seen enormous tracts of valuable habitat, certainly from a wildlife perspective as well, destroyed in floods and wildfires. It is beginning to hit home, although people still think when they watch it on the news, it's a long way away on the other side of the world. In fact, they're beginning to smell the smoke. And they're certainly, I think, beginning to feel it soon. As you know, earlier this year, India restricted the sale of some of its rice crop because they were keen to make sure they could protect their own population domestically. That would have had a very desperate and tragic effect on those people who are dependent on that rice in Africa. But the prices will start to go up in supermarkets, and people will start to realize that we are just one species on one planet with one massive problem and one last chance to sort it out. We are all in this together, and we need to pull together to sort it out. And when that message hits home, that's when I think that we're going to see very significant, rapid progress.
So what can we as ordinary people do next?
Well, I think that one of the things that handicaps our movement sometimes is that we ply the same path too often. We've got to be constantly imaginative and creative. What we are trying to do in a very difficult place, what you're trying to do is to get essentially media space so that you can present the very important message. And there were two things there. Firstly, getting the media space is hard. It's hard fought for. We live in a media space now where we're so distracted by, complete frippery in our mainstream media news. Even, too much time is given over to things which are not really news, and they're certainly not that important. So trying to clamour for the space amongst even the important bits there is really difficult, and that requires imagination and creativity to capture people's attention. I think the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that once we've gathered that media space, we use the platform to tell the message. So a couple of times recently, I've been invited to talk about actions that Just Stop Oil have taken. And I'm very quick when I'm given that opportunity to turn the conversation away from the action, which was essentially building the platform, and start talking about the real issue, the reason why people have perhaps disrupted these sporting events. It's not because they want to stop the rugby or the snooker for 5 minutes. It's because they want to generate an opportunity to talk about climate breakdown and how we should go about addressing it. And in terms of Just Stop Oil, as I said at the very outset, that's a very simple message, that we want a rapid transition away from fossil fuel dependence. So I think that's another thing we need to focus upon. We need the creativity to come up with great ideas to get that media space, but then we need to make sure that we're in a position to use that to get the message across. Otherwise, we are getting arrested, we're getting abused, we're taking all the flack and so on and so forth, but we're not actually delivering the punch that we need to deliver. And I suppose when it comes to applying the same things, your action, throwing soup over the Van Gogh, it was global news. It went all over the world, and it gave lots of people, a platform to talk about the issue. But there's only a certain number of times that you can really justify going into an art gallery anywhere in the world. And there were people who followed through and did similar things in other art galleries in the world, and they got news in those nations, and that was great. But there's only a limited number of times you can do that before basically people lose interest. And the minute they lose interest, you've lost their ear and you've lost that platform to talk about the issue. So I think what we need to do is to be, as I say, I keep saying, imaginative and creative. And also now, of course, the other thing we have to do is we have to offer people of a portfolio of ways of supporting us. Now, there will be people who are in a position where they can be arrested. There will be people in a position where they can even face incarceration, but there will be lots of people who can't. They will have dependent relatives. They may be providing care for dependent relatives. They may have families. There'll be a plethora of reasons why that's not an option for them. But we need to make sure that we do provide options for them where they can take peaceful, non-violent action. They can make their voices heard. But they don't necessarily risk what some of the other activists are prepared to risk. So on Monday, I'm organising along with Emma Smart for a group of scientists to meet outside the Houses of Parliament at 12 o'clock midday. And we think that we have 100 scientists, and we've asked them and members of the public to write to their MPs, to ask their MPs to come out and have a conversation. Now, that's a pretty passive ask. You know, what we are asking is that people write a letter or an email or whatever to their MPs. And then our scientists, civil people who are at the forefront and with their fingers on the pulse of the issues that concern us so greatly, will be there, and we will have, obviously, you know, peaceful conversations with those MPs that choose to come out. And I think that I have hopes that, you know, significant numbers of MPs will do this. I think it's increasingly something that they need to be seen to be doing. And quite clearly, we need to exercise those sorts of capacities. So it's a very different form of protest. It's a very different form of activism. It's non-confrontational in a way, but we are putting pressure on our elected representatives, the people that we voted for to represent us, to come and listen to the people who we trust when it comes to climate breakdown, because there is a mistrust amongst those politicians. You voiced that in your introduction. And so if they want us to trust them and put a cross in their box when it comes to the next election, they need to show us that they mean business when it comes to listening to the people who really know. And that may not be people like myself. I'm merely a conduit. You know, my job is to act as a link between the science and the public. I'm a science communicator. I'm not a scientist. But bringing the real deal, the scientist, to Parliament Square is another means of protest. So that's what I'm saying. We've got to think of as many different ways as we possibly can to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to engage with our mission.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. So that is the end of my part of the interview with you, and those answers were just incredible. Thank you. So we have time for just a couple of questions that the people who've come to see you have put forward. Just apologies in advance if we don't get around to answering your question, just for the sake of timing. The first question we've been sent is quite a powerful one to kick off with, and it's sort of contrasts your final point about more passive forms of action, Chris. This person has asked, at what point should non-violent civil disobedience become a revolution?
Well, we look to history to answer that, and not to ask, which point now, but to try and maybe predict that point, looking into the past. And what we know is that when it comes to social justice movements, I've already talked about the radical flank effect, where you need to be people who are seen to be more extreme, but are asking for exactly the same things in essence as the people who are seen to be more moderate. And at the moment, that's what Just Stop Oil is. And Just Stop Oil act very strictly on a non-violent direct action, no environmental damage, no damage or harm to human or animal life whatsoever. And that has proved to be a cornerstone of these types of social justice movements. But what we see if we look into history is that amongst that, there are also people who are driven to act violently. One comparison that's frequently drawn between actions like ours and those that we make are the suffragettes. But what we mustn't forget is that the suffragettes broke a lot of glass. They started quite a lot of fires. They attacked people. They were sent to jail. They were seen as enemies of the state at that time. And yet now, of course, Emmeline Pankhurst has a statue, not in Parliament Square, sadly, but just around the corner from Parliament Square, where I often go to sit and look at her and the plaques of her two relatives. I think that, unfortunately, and again, this was something that I was speaking to a Tory peer recently, And they expressed grave concern that government is not listening to the protesters, because when protesters are not listening to, then history shows that those protests escalate. Now, we all hope, of course, that if we have a revolution, it's a non-violent revolution. The revolution that we want is for people to wake up and understand our requests, and to act upon the information given to them by the scientists, and invest in that transition and start moving there as rapidly as possible. Does that happen? Not always, but that's our mission. We've got to try and keep it on that track. And that's why, another reason why you asked me why I support Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil are very clear about the fact that it's non-violent direct action. It's a peaceful movement, essentially. And that's where, at this point in time, we're trying to keep it very clearly focused.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure how many questions we have time left for, but I just have this one to ask you that's just come in. What do you think about the upcoming general election? How do you think that's going to change the playing field of civil resistance, if you will?
Well, here we are. I'm also running a series of poster campaigns at the moment under the banner of No New Oil. You can go to nonewoil.com, and there you can download a poster, and there is one for each of our principal political parties in the UK. And on it, it says, if you do not make it very clear in your manifesto that you will not invest in more oil and gas, and that you will remove subsidies to the oil and gas industry, then you won't get my vote in the next election. And again, it's a very passive way of inviting people to take part. They can go there, they can download that poster, they can post it on social media, or they can go and stick it on the wall of their constituency office if they feel compelled, or they can put it through the letterbox. I think it's, at this point in time, manifestos are being drafted. Some of them are relatively well formed. We have an opportunity here to put in, significant pressure on all of those parties to make sure that when they finally seek our vote, they have something there which is robust and meaningful and realistic for us to vote for. Because if they don't have that, then they won't get our vote. Now, one would expect, under the circumstances, because of the particular and peculiar nature of our government at the moment, that the opposition parties would be chafing at the bit to be seen to be, on our side of the equation, making sure that they were very clear about their intentions when it came to fossil fuels and animal agriculture, all sorts of things which we have the capacity to make almost immediate impact with. But at this point in time, there isn't that clarity. So again, that's why I'm doing this poster campaign with Emma Smart and Fabian Harrison. That's what our mission is to cover that part where people are quite happy to go and download those things. If we can influence those manifestos, that will be great. If we've tried to influence them and then when they're published, they don't make the grade, we've got something to complain about. And then I think we're justified to stand up and say, what you're offering is inadequate, and we're not going to vote for you on that account. And ultimately, they want our vote, so we've got to ask them to represent us. And all of us on this call, living in the semblance of a democracy in the UK, have that democratic right to ask for that if they expect us to put a cross in a box. So I think we face a make or break election. I'd love to think that there will be very clear divisions between the parties where there will be choices that we can make, not just about fossil fuel usage, but you mentioned again in your introduction about equality, about poverty, about the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, all of the ways that this impacts on us, and the national health crisis. But just bear in mind that all of those things are intrinsically linked to climate breakdown. And if they're not now, they will be very, very shortly here in the UK. In other parts of the world, they're very clearly linked already, but they will be here. And if our politicians don't wake up and understand that, and therefore understand why addressing this issue, overarching issue, is important, and it ought to be a key part of their manifesto, then it's our job now to make sure that they do understand that. And when it comes to the election, we make it very, very clear indeed. And that's one of the things that I and my colleagues, as I say, Emma and Fabian, are very keen to do.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I'm really excited about your No New Oil poster campaign. They look fantastic. That is unfortunately all the questions we have time for. Just thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. It's been really, really enlightening and really, really exciting, I think.
Anna, can I just finish with one little plea?
Please do.
I don't know all the people that have joined us this evening. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you've joined because you're interested in what we're doing, and maybe you share our fears and our anger. Anna's already said that she's very angry, and we understand why. You may not want to join us in terms of some of the things that we do, but I think it's absolutely critical at this point that you understand our motives and sympathize with those. You may not agree with all of the methods. You may think they're great and you may be chafing at the bit to join up. And we certainly hope that that's the case, and there'll be opportunities for you to talk about that later. But if you're not yet at that point in your transition from someone who is essentially worried to being so worried that you need to be active, an activist essentially, then please find some way of putting your foot on the first rung of the ladder. Find something that you can do to step out of your comfort zone and begin to make a difference. Because from my perspective, that is progress. And what you will receive from people like myself and people like Anna and all the other people within Just Stop Oil is not condemnation because you're not prepared to get arrested. You'll receive our patience, and you'll be a recipient of our kindness and thanks for taking any step that you are prepared to take. Because to make this transition, we will have to be patient, and we will certainly have to be kind.
Thank you so much, Chris. We are now going to hear from some of the amazing Just Stop Oil supporters who are going to be explaining some of the Just Stop Oil strategy, events, and plans that we have coming up. But first off, we have Indigo. Now, Indigo is a part of the Just Stop Oil core team. She is a co-founder of Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil. She's been arrested 16 times and has a 40-day suspended prison sentence for her actions, demanding that the government take action on the climate emergency. And yet she promises that she will not stop taking action until the government just stop oil. Now we're going to hear from Indigo. Take it away.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody joining tonight. I'm just in awe at how many of us are here on this call. And yeah, trying to imagine us all in real space together, you know, perhaps sat in Parliament Square having this meeting and having a chance to meet everyone here today. So there's quite a lot of new people on the call, so I want to row it back a little bit to what it is, why it is that we're taking this such drastic action, what on earth it is that we're even demanding. A lot of people think we're trying to switch off all oil overnight, and that's really not it. We're taking action to demand that our government commits to ending all new licensing and consents for the exploration, consents and production of oil, gas and coal in the UK. So this means stopping them agreeing for new oil, gas and coal within the UK. And it's a really simple demand that's backed by many, many public bodies and public figures, including the International Energy Agency. And it's an absolute key step if we're to meet our targets and secure a somewhat livable future for the future generations and people around the world right now. So it's like, what kind of context are we in? It's like, while Hurricane Idalia is battering Florida, our government is licensing new drilling for oil in the North Sea, knowing that this is going to exacerbate the problem and create more emergencies like this. While wildfires were burning parts of Greece, burning people's homes to the ground, the government is still agreeing that a new coal mine will be built in Cumbria, boring out coal from underneath the ocean for decades to come. This is a complete betrayal upon all of us here and everything that we stand for, because we know that we want like a decent place for our families to live in. We want clean air to breathe. We want to know that our government is pushing for a society that we're happy to pass on to people who come after us. So that's why we're coming together to say enough is enough, and not on my watch are you going to be drilling for this new oil, gas and coal. And we can We know that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Where would we be without the suffragettes Chris was mentioning just a moment ago? Where would we be without people fighting against the apartheid? Where would we be without the civil rights activists? Where would we be without people, perhaps some of whom are on this call tonight, who took action to stop some of the road building projects that were happening in the 90s, or to stop new coal-fired power stations being built in the early 2000s. All of these victories are because people stand up. They take time out of their ordinary lives, and they take a risk, and they take a bit of personal sacrifice in order to make these issues rise to the top of public consciousness. So we've been taking action, blockading oil depots across the country. We've been disrupting sporting and cultural events, bringing that demand to every single person in the UK and millions of people across the globe. And we've been sitting down on roads, blockading traffic, and most recently, we've been slow marching in the streets. It's the most simple tactic. A lot of people here on this call will have been on a march, and it really does feel like a march. You're just with a small group of people going through a road at a rush hour time. If I march on my own around Parliament Square, I'll be ignored. If 100 people march for a day, we're basically just laughed at. But we know that if thousands of people come together day after day, week after week, and we refuse to move when we are asked, we put the state in one hell of a dilemma. Will they ignore us? Will they allow themselves to look weak and inspire thousands upon thousands more people to come and join us, knowing that this is a moment where they can stand up against new oil and gas? Or will they fall for the other trap, which is to try and stamp down on us, to stop our noble and humble action of walking through the streets and reveal their true colours, that they're a government that wants to try to lock up ordinary people standing up for their future, ignore the scientists, and pursue new oil and gas. If they do this, they enter into a bit of a gamble, because there's only so many police cells in the city, in London. We can already see that our actions are clogging up the courts, putting pressure on the Home Office and the government, forcing members of the police to say to the government that they can't arrest their way out of climate protest. And now we know that there are going to be thousands of people joining us in the streets, marching day after day, and refusing to move, refusing to agree to the will of the police who are protecting this murderous government. We know that this will clog up the system, and it will force a reaction from the government. So what would this mean for you if you could take part? We're really in a bit of this, we can offer a lot more information if you come to one of our trainings. These are Section 12 arrests, which is a lower level offence and won't risk imprisonment for your actions and will be dealt with at a magistrate's court. But please do come to a legal briefing to find out more before you make a snap decision about whether it's something you can do. We also really need to think that now is the moment to do it. We really have just a few years to turn around this emergency that we're in. And we have a moral necessity to stand up against this evil and to take action against new oil and gas. And I promise that you'll meet the most amazing people and wonderful community if you do so. So how can you get involved? Anna's gone over the asks already, but the first simple thing you can do is you can donate. Everybody in Just Stop Oil donates. We give an hour's what we earn in an hour, we give each month to the campaign. So if you earn £10 an hour, you give £10 a month. If you earn £100 an hour, you can give £100 a month. If you can't donate, that's no problem. But everybody in the campaign does donate, and please, and that's how we fuel all of the actions that we do. So please, please, please do donate if you're in a situation to be able to. It's really really the life, we can't continue to support people by having places to stay in London, or helping them to travel down to London, or to book venues for talks like this without money in the bank. The second ask is to train with us. So we have a training called Non-Violent Action Training. You can find all of the details on the website. They're happening everywhere from Cumbria to Devon to London, and there's some that are 4 hours and some that are 8 hours, and they really go through what it means to sit on the road, what it means to act in non-violence, what it means to be accountable for your actions, and it also helps you to meet people in your local area and to understand if it's something that you want to do. Coming to this training does not mean that you have to take action. It just is a really good way to find out if this is for you, and it'll give you great skills and reflections on history that are enriching for you and your life in general. They're free and they're happening near you, so please do come to a non-violent training. And there you'll also hear about more of the trainings that we have on offer, which are delivered through Zoom. There's a legal training, there's a resilience training, there's a de-escalation training to keep people calm on the road. There's plenty of support as we pool at the knowledge that we've built together as a community. And I think it's important here to note as well, all of these actions are backed by an amazing media team, an amazing mobilization team who are running this stuff, amazing spokes team like Anna, who are speaking, trained to speak to the media and press when these actions are going on. But yeah, so please do come to a non-violent action training near you to integrate within the campaign. And then the third ask is to take action with us. For some people, that will mean risking arrest once. For some people, it will mean coming down for the whole week of action and going out day after day after day, because we know it's only when we're a non-stop force that we're going to be able to get to this tipping point where we force a reaction from our government. So I'm just going to go through here the dates. We act with our region, and we act on a rota system. This enables us to sustain the campaign for a longer amount of time, and it enables us to act with people that we know and have met before. So on the 29th of October, East of England and Midlands will be taking action for 1 week. From the 5th of November, the South West, South East and North regions will be taking action for 1 week. That's South West and Wales. And then from the 12th of November, London and the students group will be taking action for 1 week. So if you can't make your week, you can make other weeks, but please make your regional week if possible. So I'm going to go over those asks one more time. That's to donate to keep the campaign going. It's to come to a non-violent action training near you, and it's to take action with us. It's to take action with us this autumn to force the government to stop licensing new oil, gas and coal.
Thank you so much, Indigo. And again, at the end of this talk, a poll will be available for you to indicate which of the pathways you'd like to take. And now we're going to welcome Willow, who's going to talk about the student strategy. And Willow is 23 years old, and she is working full-time for the Just Stop Oil campaign. She recently graduated from a physics degree at the University of Manchester and was working as a sustainable energy consultant when she decided to quit her job and dedicate herself to civil resistance full-time. Over to you, Willow.
Hi, everyone. Echoing what Indigo said, it's amazing to be speaking to so many people today. As Anna said, I actually recently quit my job to do this full time, and that's because I'm a young person, and I understand that unless we fight back now, there will be nothing left for us, because we have the most to lose, which is why I've decided to dedicate myself full time to doing this, because it feels the best bet at securing my future for myself and for everybody that I care about. So the Just Stop Oil Students Project is a youth-led sub-project of the main Just Stop Oil campaign. And the aim of this project is to empower hundreds more students to fight back against the destruction of their future. And this will culminate in them coming to London in November and taking action with the rest of the Just Stop Oil campaign. And this is how young people will play their part in defeating the oil industry in 2023. How are we going to do it? Well, it's actually already happening, and it's been happening for a while now. We already have an amazing network of brave students who are leading this initiative, like Arthur, that you're going to hear from next. And they've been doing incredible things. They already had an action week in our last action phase, and they've been volunteering all their time over their summer. Some of them have even dropped out of uni to dedicate themselves to this full time and help other young people fight back. We've got a really exciting mass youth training event tomorrow, which is the start of our student-led campaign. And we currently have 200 people signed up for this. And this will be the biggest training session that Just Stop Oil has ever held. So it's like super exciting. And the whole thing has been organized by students and young people. We're offering people, students and young people from all over the country, accommodation, food, trainings, and all of this has been organized by students. It's completely youth-led, so they're making all of the food, they've organised all the accommodation. It's pretty incredible, and I'm so excited to be in the room with everybody tomorrow. The aim of this training weekend is for young people to come together and get to know each other, and learn how we can support each other, build a community of resistance, and engage in resistance together to prevent climate breakdown. And I've been in the room with some of these students, and just the energy at the moment is incredible. You can feel that we're really, really going to do something. It feels amazing. After this training weekend, the plan is to hit campuses hard in September. And we already have established groups at most of the major universities. And we want all of the student population to be talking about us and invite them to join us and learn about what we're doing. So we're going to be doing this by holding talks, by holding socials, by holding events at universities all over the country, again, led by students, and by engaging in transgressive actions on campuses to inspire other members of the student population to come and join us. We want to call out the complicity of the universities in propping up the government in what they're doing in licensing new oil and gas. And they're doing this by allowing fossil fuel research on their campuses. So we're going to call that out by doing these actions on campuses and calling students to do the same, and then come down to London in November and finally end new oil and gas in 2023. I'm just so excited about this student campaign because, as I said, the energy at the moment is through the roof, and it is so amazing to see what can happen when young people come together and unite under a common goal. So many times throughout history, we have seen that young people have been at the forefront of social change. And I don't think this time will be any different. I've struggled for a really long time with climate anxiety and fear about the future, but I feel so much hope when I'm in the same room as all of these young people who are taking action on this. Through my time at university, I was part of a lot of university campaigns, divestment campaigns for like vegan food on campus, and we worked really hard, but nothing ever changed. In those 4 years, the situation only got worse. But this time I feel like we can really do something because we're going to the heart of power and we have a plan. So yeah, I'm super, super excited to see what happens. And if there are any young people on this call who are interested in coming along to the training camp tomorrow, you can sign up on the Just Stop Oil website. You can go to juststopoil.org/students and sign up there. And you'll also be connected with your local university group. Everybody is super nice and friendly, and you can get to know some people before you go back to university in September. We're building a really, really great community of resistance here. And there is also a Zoom next Thursday at the 7th of September where you can hear more about the student campaign and get involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Willow. The student movement is just so exciting right now. I highly recommend you join if you can. Finally, we're going to hear a personal story from one of our youth Just Stop Oil supporters, Arthur. Now, Arthur is an English literature graduate who joined Just Stop Oil in April of 2023 after being inspired by their brief stint as part of Extinction Rebellion Amsterdam. Through Just Stop Oil, Arthur has made headlines and gone viral by disrupting corporate pride and has been able to enact their belief that people have the sensitivity and power to affect real change, and that in many ways we were made to fight. Please, over to you, Arthur.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Hi, everyone. It is just amazing to see how many people are here and just such incredible speakers so far. I've got 3 very tough acts to follow. But yeah, my name's Arthur. I'm 22. As I've just been reminded, I'm no longer a student, which I forget myself sometimes. But yeah, English literature graduate, which a lot of people said was a useless degree, but look at me now doing speaking and stuff. It's gotta help with that. My kind of journey with Just Stop Oil had a similarly boring academic start, because about 2 years ago, I was in the position where I knew climate change was real, which is a good start. I knew it was an issue, something that needed to be solved, but I didn't realize the full scale of it at all. I got put on this course, this module at university, and it was called Greening the World. And I sort of thought, you're kind of preaching to the converted here, right? I know what you're going to say. But what actually happened was they laid out exactly what is really going on and what is really going to happen, and the crisis and the climate breakdown and the social breakdown that will come, and the scale and the immediacy of this issue just sort of paralyzed me with fear. And what also really got to me was that I didn't even want to be on this course. Like, it was complete chance that I got put on this particular module. The one I wanted was already full. And so there was this element of luck that I found out, and it felt really isolating because it felt like I'd come across this big dirty secret almost. And then it was just a question of, why isn't everyone running around losing their minds essentially when this is what is happening right now? And so then, in the midst of all this kind of isolation and what do I do, it really became a question of, how can I do anything against these odds? And then in the very same module, they started talking about direct action. They went into the political history of it, the social science of it. And I did some of my own thinking and reading, and it was like, right, that's what I've got to do, essentially. So I joined Extinction Rebellion Amsterdam because I was in Amsterdam at the time. Then when I was back in the UK, I did some slow marching with Just Stop Oil. And particularly that slow marching, whilst I was doing it, it gave me this feeling that I hadn't really had before, that this wasn't just what I should be doing, or even that it was what I needed to be doing, but it was this feeling that I couldn't possibly be doing anything else in that moment. Like, that is what I had to be doing right there and then. And after all that happened, then I decided, it was time to escalate. And that's when the option to disrupt Pride started getting floated around. Now, I talked about this feeling of this being what I needed to do, but in the run-up to actions, I still struggle to shake that sort of Daily Mail columnist in the back of my mind, the one that's like, are you just doing this for attention? Just doing it to make yourself feel better? That kind of stuff. And I mean, in the run-up to Pride, that person in the back of my mind was really chatty. I mean, for the main reason that Pride personally is very important to me. 5 years ago, when I was kind of just coming to terms with my queerness, it was this place of belonging, and it gave me the sense of acceptance that I hadn't really had before. And so it became a question of, do I want to disrupt that? Do I want to take that away in any way? But then I remembered that we weren't disrupting pride, we were disrupting corporate pride, which is a very different thing, because at its core, pride is a protest and a celebration of visibility. And so when companies like Coca-Cola, who was the specific company we disrupted in the end, when they can use that visibility for advertising, when they have a litany of human rights violations, they have deep ties to the fossil fuel industry, which also will, the climate crisis will also disproportionately affect queer people and all those people at the periphery of society because of social breakdown, you know, people of color, working class people, women, etc., etc. So when a company that fuels all these crimes can kind of stick a rainbow bandage over them and they be forgiven, it just was unacceptable to me. So it was also because of that personal connection that I felt I had to do it. So we got to the actual action. We kind of lifted up the barrier at the side. We got to enjoy a bit of pride before, which was fun. I did some spraying. I Love It by Charlie XCX was blasting out, which, if anyone knows that song, it was absolutely perfect. Couldn't have written it better myself. And during the action, it was that same feeling of, this is where I need to be. I mean, there were mixed reactions, as there always are. Some people really got it. Some people really didn't get it. But I mean, our aim is to be annoying, so we can't really be surprised when we annoy some people. That will just happen. And then we got to the actual arrest, which, I mean, was extremely intimidating to start with, because it was just this swarm of police people that came towards us, like a good 20 or so. And they kind of hauled us away. But what they don't tell you about arrests, what they don't show in the movies, is just how much waiting there is. I mean, there's a lot of downtime, you know, in between everything. So eventually we got to the station, we got booked in, and you're still surrounded by people at this point. You know, it might sometimes be police people who are trying to get information out of you. You know, sometimes they are just being nice, but you're still surrounded by people. So when that cell door first closes and everything goes quiet and you're on your own, then those sort of back and forth thoughts that I was talking about, and those feelings of isolation, that's when they can really sort of bubble to the top. And that's when it's like, have I done the right thing? You know, I mean, it's done now, there's no taking it back, but yeah, is this what I was supposed to do? I mean, to make matters worse, I asked for reading material and they gave me Boris Johnson's autobiography, which I was sort of like, I don't know if you know why I'm here, but this isn't what I'm looking for. But after 10 hours of being held there with nothing but Bojo for companionship, I eventually got released. And what Just Stop Oil do, and many other groups as well, they do something called police station support, where there's at least a couple people waiting outside your police station all hours of the night, so that whenever you get released, there is someone to give you some food, someone to give you some beer, someone to give you some hugs, all that kind of stuff. And when I'd been stuck in the middle of those kind of feelings of isolation and those back and forths, and that kind of just, you know, tearing me up inside like that. And then suddenly when you're met with these smiling faces who give you hugs and tell you the reaction and how it's been getting attention to the actual action, that rush of community just sort of cuts through everything else. All that surrounding noise just sort of dissolved for me. And that's really what kind of gives me the strength to keep doing this, because to be surrounded by people who can essentially be bothered to give a shit, it's really refreshing, it's inspiring. And ever since joining Just Stop Oil, I'm not going to pretend that the back and forths are ever fully solved. They are, you know, they get solved every now and then, but I think some healthy doubt is useful. But that feeling of isolation and that feeling of those massive odds against me, that has been fully solved. Because, as I say, just surrounded by these people that inspire you to keep doing what you feel you have to do, it's just completely refreshing, and those odds become a lot more manageable. So from my personal experience, if any of you have these sort of feelings, these doubts, these isolations, from my own experience, Just Stop Oil has really provided the means and the amazing people surrounded me to allow me to do what I feel I have to do. Not just need to do, but what I have to do, for the sake of everyone and for the sake of all life. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Arthur. And thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you who attended this talk. I know it's run over time-wise a little bit, and I apologize for that, but thank you so much for staying with us. We're now going to be launching a poll about the call to action that you can follow. Please make sure you do this before you leave or before the breakout rooms open. It's very important. I'm just going to go over the calls to action one more time, just to refresh your memory. So once again, the pathways are committing to a slow march with your region for a week and risking arrest at least once, attending a non-violence training to learn skills and resilience to join us in civil resistance and feel a part of our community of trust. And now just a quick apologies, the previous link to the training wasn't working. So an updated link to the non-violence training is going to be in the chat now. Also, people are donating roughly 1 hour's income every month. Links are going to be posted into the chat now about donating that will ensure that we can support everyone who wants to join the campaign and play their vital part. Now, and finally, if you are a student and you are interested in taking part, then joining the Student Action Network and coming along to the big students event that we have tomorrow, the 1st and 2nd of September in London. Now, if you'll just take a couple of seconds to fill in the polls, thank you so much for doing this. And I just want to stress again what an incredible and inspiring evening this has been. I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude for every one of you who's come to this talk. And hopefully it's given us all some things to think about and inspired us all to take action, be it slow marching, be it donating, being just downloading Signal and introducing yourself to the community.